Hi everyone, my name is Jamie Brandis and I'm the Program Manager for the Colorado SBDC Network's TechSource Commercialization Program. I'd like to welcome you all today to part 2 of the How to Write a Competitive SBIR STTR Proposal 3-part series. We're glad you could join us and we hope that you'll receive some great takeaways today. Very quickly, I'd like to introduce you to our Colorado SBDC TechSource Commercialization Program. This is designed to support science and technology ventures throughout the state of Colorado. Different from many accelerators and incubators that lead to equity funding, SBDC TechSource focuses especially on sources of non-dilutive capital and on technology commercialization and SBIR grants. Colorado SBDC TechSource is a specially designed program that taps subject matter experts such as Stephanie Amond today to provide you, the science and technology entrepreneurs and companies, from pre-startup through advanced second stage with direct assistance. This comes in the form of customized expert consulting at no cost to you and through relevant workshops and events in person when possible and online throughout the year. This year, all events and meetings are virtual. Topics include SBIR, STTR, and advanced industry grant proposals in compliance, R&D tax credits, technology commercialization, IP protection and assistance with the patent process, market research, market sizing, strategic and tactical planning, access to capital, and much more. These resources are available thanks to support from SBA's FAST program, VISA, the Colorado Office of Economic Development and International Trade, the Minority Business Office, Zero, and the City of Boulder. If you're a business located in a rural part of Colorado or are minority or women-owned, we may have additional resources to help you, so please reach out. A few quick things. After this webinar, if you're interested in meeting one-on-one with an SBDC TechSource specialist or attending events, workshops, or webinars, please visit our website, which is sbdc-techsource.org, to get started. Today's webinar will be recorded and you will receive an email following the presentation with a link to the recording. You'll also receive a copy of today's presentation slides. A few housekeeping things. Everyone is currently on mute. If you have questions, please type them into the chat bar during the presentation and we will get to them at the end of today's session as time allows. If you don't get your question answered today, we'll follow up afterwards. If you haven't already, I encourage you to sign up for the third part of this series. Now I'd like to introduce you to today's webinar presenter, Stephanie Amond. Stephanie is the founder of Arrowhead Solutions, LLC, which is a full-service solutions provider for government contracting and SBIR STTR grants. She founded Arrowhead Solutions in 2009 after holding contract management positions in both government and private industry for nearly 9 years. Arrowhead was formed with the goal of providing companies with the extra knowledge and manpower they need to succeed in the world of government contracting and innovation grants. Specializing in capture management, proposal preparation, contract management, subcontracts, accounting, and compliance, Arrowhead provides skill sets not commonly available to smaller government contractors and small technology ventures. Arrowhead Solutions, SBDC TechSource, and other organizations partner on coloradosbir.com to increase timely information and education for Colorado's SBIR and government contracting companies. We've been fortunate to work with Stephanie for many years. Now I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate that. It's been great to work with everybody at the SBDC, and it's been a pleasure putting together this 3-part series. Hopefully you were able to join us for our part 1. Today we're going to be discussing kind of the nitty-gritty of SBIR STTR proposals. And just as a recap, in part 1 we just spoke about what the program was, what agencies participate, how to become eligible, and just sort of the statistics about how easy it is to win, how competitive is it, and what's the benefit ultimately of going into this program. So today we're going to pick up where we left off last week, which is essentially what I call the go decision or the green light. So you found a solicitation You found a topic, the timing's right, your technology fits, everything, the stars are aligning for you. So here we are, we're about to write a proposal. So what we'll go through today really is about the proposal content. If you've never written an SBIR proposal before, been participating in a team who has, this will be all new for you. If you have done this before, hopefully you'll learn a little bit about some of the tips and techniques and maybe some changes that if you haven't been in the program for a while, some differences between the agency. So we'll kind of dig into content and we'll follow that up separately with pricing. I kind of like to put pricing aside as a separate discussion because everybody seems to me in a little bit different trajectory on whether or not they really have a handle on pricing, what pricing entails, what to expect. And so I want to separate that today. We'll look at a couple of templates and tools. Thankfully, the agencies provide some things for us to take a look at, and so you don't have to start from scratch. We'll dive into a little bit about commercialization, since commercialization is the ultimate goal of the SBIR STTR program. It's, you know, kind of, it's within the name of the TechSource program, and the idea is essentially to get your technology out to market. So we'll talk a little bit about commercialization here because it is something that is scored during evaluation. And then we'll look at a couple of need to knows. And just as a housekeeping, before I forget, we did get a handful of questions from last week. I either responded to you directly or Jamie responded to you. I have included a couple of answers inside today's presentation as appropriate. One or two of the questions that will show up next week because the answers to those questions will show up next week. So if don't feel like I forgot about you, I do have you recorded for next week to get those addressed. Okay, let's dive in here. So the content of the proposal, it's multifaceted. There's many parts to it. And the very first thing that needs to happen is we kind of talked about last week, there's just this basic registration information. So you're going to be providing within the proposal in whatever format the agency is dictating per their solicitation, your EIN. You don't need a cage code until your award is imminent, but I highly recommend getting a cage code prior to proposal. So that will have a space on the application for you to fill that in. Your address, I mean, this is all very typical stuff, but you might need to look up your +4 on your zip code. And of course, your DUNS number. This is as of July 30th, so as a few days ago. December 2020, DUNS will be replaced. So I'm going to still keep using the word DUNS. This endeavor for replacing the DUNS keeps getting pushed out. So I'm still going to just say DUNS for this presentation. But you're going to get a new entity ID essentially through SAM. So keep an eye out for that. But essentially, when you're starting a proposal, whatever the agency is asking for is just basic company information. Shouldn't be hard. You already know all that. And if you went through part 1, you already have all these numbers and all these registrations to put into the application. So in general, and I'm going to say this broad statement, I've tried to cover the various structures of the agencies, but in general, all of those SBIR submission packages, STTR, have the following components. So there's this thing that's either like a cover page, a summary, certifications. There might be some commercial metrics that go along. It's sort of a mixed bag, but it's this hodgepodge of information about what you're proposing and certifications regarding your company and your proposal. And then the meat of it all is the technical proposal. What are you actually going to do? So a lot of people really focus on the technical proposal, which is really very important, of course, because that's what's being scored. But I'm going to make a point to make sure that you understand all of the other things that you need to do, so those aren't left for the very last moment. And then if you don't get to them, you will not be evaluated. So they're just as important in a way as the technical proposal. There'll be cost proposal and budget forms. And there could be supporting documents, again, depending on the agency. And as I mentioned, each agency does have different requirements. And to note, within the Department of Defense, each component also has different requirements as well. So, you know, there is one portal for DoD, but each component has their own solicitation underneath a broad DoD umbrella. And so that solicitation will dictate something like whether or not what you need for your supporting documents, whether or not you need a budget narrative to go along with your cost proposal, whether or not you need a copy of a draft subcontract to go along with your proposal. That's all different component to component. So just be aware once you get into the DoD system that it looks the same for the user interface online, but the solicitation will actually dictate what has to be input into that online portal. Firm certifications. This may be done on a proposal by proposal basis, or it might be done annually, sort of in your overall registration for the agency's submission portal. Again, it just depends, but the certifications are all essentially the same. So first, you have to certify that you meet the ownership and control requirements of the SBIR program. And we went over this in part 1. And it'll ask you questions regarding the evidence that you have for this. You don't have to actually support the evidence, submit it, but you just have to, if somebody were to ask you to prove something, that you could. Do you have the appropriate documentation regarding the eligibility of owners? Again, remember in part 1, we talked about needing US ownership. So do you have the passports of the owners or the green cards or whatever to prove that you have US ownership? Again, you don't have to submit those, but do you just have them? Certifying that the number of employees is less than 500 people, including any affiliates. So again, making sure that you've counted your affiliates appropriately. Certifying that you have no findings from the SBA on your size status, that nobody's questioning your current size status from the SBA. Confirmation that you meet the limitations and rules and restrictions regarding hedge fund, venture capital, private equity ownership. There is a question about whether or not your company is owned by a faculty member or a student of institution of higher education. It's not necessarily a disqualifier, but it's a certification. There are questions about socioeconomic qualifications, such as if you're veteran-owned, women-owned, disabled veteran. There are race and ethnicity questions sometimes, but you do not have to answer those. Those are optional. Those are just for statistics purposes. There is a certification regarding unpaid federal tax liability for the company. So you have to be all on the up and up on your taxes. And if the company itself or any of the owners or agents have felony criminal violations, and within the certification, there's a time period for both the tax liability and the violations. It's not ever, but it's, you know, maybe 24 months, I think, for tax liability, maybe 5 years for criminal violations. Again, read the certification form closely. And then, of course, at the end, if you're doing this online, it's a digital certification, you know, typing in your name and saying, I certify to all the answers that I just made. But just be aware that you have to read these very closely so that you don't accidentally answer something incorrectly. Sometimes there's double negatives in these certifications, so just be careful when you read them. The agencies will sometimes ask questions regarding audit information. So the basic question is regarding your accounting system. And if you have had a federal agency audit your accounting system, they'll ask, you know, who the agency was, who the auditor was, phone number, email address, when that last audit date was. You may have to provide and actually attach the actual audit report, even if it's, you know, 10 years old. You still, because DCAA is that far behind sometimes, that you might need to actually provide an audit report and provide other information about when the accounting system itself was approved versus the audit versus approval. When did that happen? Do you have a federal rate agreement? Do you have an overhead cost audit? There'll be a series of additional questions that might open up to you regarding your accounting system. But if you've never had a federal agency audit your accounting system, don't worry, that's not going to count against you. You just say no and you move on. The commercialization information, this is different than the commercialization narrative that we'll talk about later. This is for companies that have already previously won phase 1 and phase 2 awards. So it is agency dependent on how you're reporting this information, but the reason why we are reporting this information, and we'll talk a little bit about this in part 3, is regarding your performance benchmarks. There are some rules about how many phase 1s need to lead to phase 2s and how many 2s need to lead to a certain amount of commercialization revenue. And if you don't meet these performance benchmarks after a significant amount of time and a number of awards, you could be kicked out of the program. So this is really important to keep up with if you do have phase 1 and phase 2 awards and commercialization to report. So you'll go into whatever method that the agency is requiring per the solicitation to report your prior phase 1 and phase 2 awards, any patents, of course, the outside revenue generated like by sales, investment, other contributions that came off of core technology from SBIR, the specific phase 3 funding, and then what ends up happening is kind of like an overall score of your ability to commercialize. So the score will kind of be your, so one agency calls it a commercialization index. So, just make sure that if you are coming to the point where you've received a number of awards, you've been in the program for a little while, years, that you are very clued in to what your commercialization information is saying. Because if you've been around for a while and you've been gathering revenue and winning awards, your score will be important at some point in the evaluation of future proposals. So it's really important to pay attention to this. But to note that if you don't have any prior SBIR experience, don't worry, you'll have a neutral score. It's not going to count against you. Don't worry about trying to fill it all in. Just as time goes on, just make sure you keep up with this. As I mentioned earlier, I'm using the word cover page here, but this is kind of like proposal summary, certifications, basic information about the proposal, potentially about the points of contact for the proposal. This is where you put your title, but try to create a unique title. Do not use the topics title. It can be kind of hard because maybe your technology really is the title, but try to get a nice title that might catch a reviewer's eye. There'll generally be a request for abstract and potentially a discussion regarding benefits of if the proposal selected, what the benefits were. So generally I like to think of, if it's not required, I still like to think of it as being 200 words. And it just describes the project, and then it describes the anticipated benefits and then commercial applications. So read the solicitation closely. The abstract is non-proprietary, so you just need to make sure that you're okay with it being posted onto SBIR.gov or to any of the agency's SBIR sites. You should also be asked for keywords. Generally, these are 8 words or phrases that describe the project. So if anybody were doing a keyword search, they should be in the abstract, these words. But if anybody were doing a keyword search regarding your project, that this would be able to pull those up. So we'll get to this a little bit later, but a couple of the agencies have their own online submission process, and then a handful of agencies use Fastlane or grants.gov, which is this bulky PDF form that's semi-live or multiple forms. That's called an SF424. So you may be typing all of this onto an online slick user interface with a, save and next, or you might be kind of typing this all in or copying and pasting from something else into kind of a bulky PDF sort of form. So I'm trying to be kind of general on how this actually works in reality, just be aware there's kind of these two basic methods for getting all of this information onto virtual paper. Okay, so let's talk about the technical volume. That was kind of the administrative stuff that you'll have to just be aware of. There'll be a few more things I'll point out. Again, each agency might ask for something different, but in general, when we talk about a technical volume or project narrative, you have to follow the solicitation format. It's very clear in each of the solicitations for each agency what it needs to have. But generally, this is what it consists of. You start with the identification and significance of the problem or opportunity. So what is the agency's need? What is the agency's problem? Why is it important? And why is this going to be an important problem to solve? What are your company's technical objectives? This is always very confusing, and almost every proposal I write from new SBIR companies is the delineation between what an objective is and what a task is. So objectives, we like to see about 2 to 3 objectives in a proposal. These objectives meet the goals of phase 1. So remember, you're trying to prove technical feasibility, and there might be goals hidden or even explicitly written in the topic of the agency solicitation. So your objective obviously is to meet the goal of the agency for phase 1. So it's a higher goal. That's your objective, is to meet the goal. Within the statement of work, which you get to put together, are tasks. So what tasks will you have to accomplish within the period of performance that will lead, if they're successful, will lead to meeting the objectives? So that's very important. And your statement of work needs to be clear. It needs to be measurable. It needs to show, very specifically what you're going to be doing over the course of time. So say phase 1 over 6 months, what exactly needs to be done to complete the R&D to meet the objectives of your project. You'll need to be talking about related work. So, I can't just come off the street and say I'm going to do an SBIR for a brand new satellite because I have no related work to that. So and it doesn't have to be government work, what kind of related work has your company done or people in your company have done that is relevant to this project? It just shows that you are legitimate. And what kind of relationship with future research or R&D does this project benefit? So what's maybe the tie between phase 1 and phase 2? Or what's maybe the tie between successful work under this phase 1 and maybe some other commercial projects? So, this can't live in a bubble. It has to grow and transition and commercialize. So what is that relationship? You do need a commercialization strategy. It may be embedded in a technical volume, or it might be a separate document that you've written up. But we'll talk a little bit more about commercialization strategy here later. But again, remember, this is an evaluation factor. It is core to the SBIR STTR program. And it's really the only reason you should get in is because you're writing a phase 1 so you can get to phase 3. Really, you have to have a strategy to get there. You will have to identify the key personnel on your team. You could have a subcontractor as key personnel, but the main key personnel, if only one, is your principal investigator. Again, this might be embedded into the technical volume. This usually includes resume-like information. And again, pay attention to the solicitation on exactly what they want to see about these people. But it also might be a separate form as well regarding key personnel and specific information about those persons. There should be an identification, depending on the agency, about whether or not there's foreign citizens involved. Again, it could be a separate document. And you should talk about, or you will be talking about, facilities and equipment. So where is the work going to be located? What kind of special equipment do you have, including your subcontractors? It's okay to rely, as I mentioned in phase 1, perhaps you have a subcontractor who has a particular lab with a particular machine in it. You can also talk about, say you're expanding, you have a future facility in mind and you're going to be moving into that during or after the period performance, and you want to talk about it, you definitely can kind of toot your own horn on what facilities you have. And this, again, could be a separate section under the technical volume or a separate document, depending on the agency's solicitation. You will have to talk about subcontractors and consultants. As a reminder, these are the people who are involved in performing the scope of work. It's not a vendor that you're just purchasing some commercial off-the-shelf stuff from. So you will want to talk about who they are, why they're chosen, what their capabilities are, what makes them unique. If they're going to be performing part of your scope of work, you better have some reason why you want them as part of your team and want to tell everybody else about why they're great. And you also finally will have to have a prior, current, or pending support section. So if you have had some history with the federal government, this is not just SBIR specific, but say the federal government is already reviewing a proposal for something similar, or you've already been awarded for something similar, they want to just make sure they're not double funding the same thing. So you will have to be aware of this and be very honest about it too. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get kicked out, but never put in a proposal for the same exact thing that you've already been funded for, because that will be, somebody will find out and you will get kicked out and you'll be in trouble. So, but you do need to do some sort of disclosure about something that could be similar so that nobody jumps to any conclusions. So this is the overall, I spent a lot of time on this one slide, and each solicitation will have more detail under each of these bullets. What exactly do you need to write about? Suggested page lengths, various bullets that you might need to have, how the format's working. Because every agency is very different, I couldn't fit that all into this 1 hour session. When we look at some of the templates, you'll be able to see kind of how the templates are built to give you more detail about what each of these sections. But the takeaway is that there's a lot to write. You may not have very many pages, maybe 10 to 15 pages. And so you have to be very diligent on making your case for why this is innovative, but also putting in a whole bunch of other information that you may not have been planning to talk about, and save some room for those things. Some key points regarding the tech volume. The first time I review a client's technical volume and edit it and try to help make the case is I sit back and think about, what is the agency actually asking for? I take a look at their solicitation again, I read the topic really closely. What are they really saying? I look at any Q&A that's been posted, and then is the proposal written clear enough that is being addressed? You may think you've addressed it, but a third party reads it, has no idea what you're talking about, and it's not because it's over their head technically. It's just a lot of proposals kind of just run off onto some weird tangents, and you really have to keep your focus. Is it clear that this is innovative? It may be the most innovative thing in the world, but I've read so many proposals that it's just not clear that this is really the coolest thing. So why does this proposal have technical merit? Spell it out for them. Even highlight it and bold it if you need to show the innovation of what you're proposing. Make sure that it is clear that you've done your research, that you have references, to maybe journal articles or, whatever the case may be, studies that show that you understand what state of the art is, that you understand what the agency's focus is at that time, that your whole entire proposal really shows that you're in the know. Figures and tables always do help in the technical volume, because they are key to just really distilling down your understanding and really driving home a point about something, and sometimes it helps save space. And always remember that you can lose or capture a reader in that very first section, that identification of the problem and significance of the opportunity. You could just totally grab someone, or they could just put it aside. So, I really like making sure that within the first 2 pages that you've really spelled out why you should get funding. And, the whole entire proposal, are you equipped to accomplish this? Is this worthy all the way to phase 3? You're not only telling people like all this technical stuff, and you may have pages of calculations and graphics that are awesome, but have you really throughout the whole proposal said this is worthy? That's the key. I want to touch on this SF424 really closely. So again, this is a funky PDF and series of attachments. And the DOE, HHS, NSF, Department of Commerce, which is NISNOA, and USDA all use this SF424 through grants.gov or fastlane.gov. That's how everything's submitted. The agencies that have their own online formats are DOD and NASA. So just to be aware that there are differences in how these get submitted. This is a general SF424 outline. So these are all the bits and pieces that get submitted through Fastlane or grants.gov. So you will have different fields to type things in, or you will have a main PDF form or an online dashboard of sorts that you upload these various bits and pieces. Again, the solicitation will tell you. But in the SF424, the project narrative is what we call the tech volume. So don't get confused by if you don't see tech volume in the SF424, it's the narrative. But essentially the same stuff: key persons, related budget, certification information, commercialization plans. It's just kind of a different structure. Some homework that you need to make sure of is, who's your PM, who's your TPOC, what's their interest area. This will all help you write your technical proposal. If you can, contact those people at the government, understand what they're most in need of. That will really, really help your technical volume. Try to use a Q&A platform or watch for amendments. Here's a link to the DoD one so you can interact with these TPOCs a little bit more, just to get a better idea of what they're looking for. Because anybody who's established a relationship with a TPOC will potentially have a leg up, just because you're not coming in cold. You may also have supporting documents, any letters of support from outside companies, say a phase 3 company that would buy what you want to ultimately build, if they're allowed. You might have additional cost information, more certifications, data rights, which we'll talk about in phase 3. So you might have some more bits and pieces. I'm not going to go through all of these proposal certifications, but essentially you will have to say, yes, I certify to all of these questions regarding your performance of the award, regarding, PI, export compliance, work done in the United States. You just have to say, yes, I understand to all of these things in your proposal. Again, they will give you the format and the form to do that. We'll talk about pricing a little bit. So again, technical volume, certifications, supporting documents, all that good stuff. But we also have price. The structure again differs. Again, if you're using SF424 or if you're using like a DoD, they have online fields that self-calculate. But ultimately, you know what the threshold is. They say you have $125,000 max. But your job still is to figure out what the actual cost of your project is going to be, because most likely you're going to get a firm fixed price and you're going to say, I want $124,999. Well, you better make sure that the statement of work that you're proposing is going to cost you less than that. So you really have to truly cost your proposal. So how much labor are you going to need? What other direct costs do you have? Are you going to need subcontractors? How much money are they going to ask for? What are your indirect rates, your G&A overhead? And then you have to account for profit. Generally, 7% is acceptable for profit, but that can go down, and I've seen ones that are higher. The solicitation may dictate what it cannot go above. But sit down and figure this all out. it's acceptable to go all the way up just to bump up against that dollar cap, but you have to ensure that what you're proposing, that price really aligns with the duration and the tasks that you have to complete. So if you have just a couple of tasks and you're asking for max value, that's not going to make sense to anyone. Or you have like 50 tasks and you only have $150,000 in 6 months, that's not going to make any sense either. So again, actually build up this price. And we like to suggest using Excel, like what is it actually going to cost you to do this? You should retain all basis of estimates to justify the pricing, you know, quotes, letters, or, you know, just kind of your methodology for how you got to labor. You might need to provide pay stubs during negotiations. So make sure it's actual pay for people. And then some agencies do request a budget narrative. So this is the actual basis of estimate. It's multiple pages long and you're proving to them how you got to your number. So don't just assume because they say, hey, we're going to give you $150,000 that you just can put in whatever numbers that add up to $150,000. This actually has to be a true number for yourself. Just as a structure example from NASA, you can see that this is kind of the navigation screen from the NASA website. So you kind of have to start with direct labor, you apply your overhead, you apply your G&A, you apply your profit, you know. And again, if you have any other costs, those will kind of go in between those. But at its basic sense, that's sort of the section and how they walk you through that. You will need to talk about your PI's level of effort. So the total PI percentage of time worked on a project is the number of hours you've proposed for the PI, and that is divided by the number of working hours during the period of performance. And so DOE has their own calculation, and you'll see that in their solicitation, but just make sure that you're not proposing a PI and they're going to work 5 hours, you know, for the whole project. They can definitely work a lot as long as it's reasonable and they're not, you know, you certify that they're not overbooked in other areas of their work, that they could actually perform how many hours that you're proposing. So it just has to be a reasonable number. I wanted to show this indirect cost worksheet sample from the Department of Energy. If you've never done indirect rate calculation, you need to contact the SBDC. They'll work you through it, but you know, just make sure that you have an idea of what, you know, your direct costs are, and this could be a budget, it could be historical, but what your G&A, and if you understand unallowable costs, so that you can recapture your indirect costs on your proposal. You should never make up an indirect rate out of whatever, I guess. You can if you need to, but I'm not recommending it. But that's a whole nother class, so we won't really get into it, but I wanted to show you that DOE does have a really nice spreadsheet. I've provided a link in here for you to get to this if you wanted to try this on your own. Some people ask me about adequate accounting systems and audits. This is a reference slide for you. This is really DOD if you're worried about them. This is their warning to tell you to get your accounting system in compliance before you hit phase 2. So I'll let you kind of click on here and read that since that won't apply to everyone. Now let's get into the templates and tools here. So the DoD has a template, Navy has some templates. Again, components have their own within DoD. NASA has a great site too. So I just wanted to show you, DoD's is kind of looking funny this morning. So I was going to show you this NASA site. And what's really nice about it is that it provides all of these proposal forms by phase 1, phase 2. It gives you an idea of what you'll need to see for certifications and the summary and the budget. It may not be a template, but at least it'll be an example. So this, and again, NASA has a briefing chart. That's, again, read the solicitation. No other agency requires you to have a briefing chart, but at least NASA gives you the template. So it's really nice that they have all of these. So just pay close attention to the solicitation to see if there is a template available to you. And these are just some of the ones that I had pulled out quickly. And we can go back to one of them if we have questions at the end. There are some applicant resources. So if you're not looking at DOD or NASA, and those really are the ones that kind of have these templates, DOE has applicant resources, and within here there's a commercialization plan example. So it's not a template, but it's an example for you to follow. There's an application checklist, and then this is where the 3-tier indirect rate model I just showed you a screenshot of. There's an actual downloadable Excel workbook in this link, and we'll see how this is working this morning. So there's a lot of information in here for the applicants, but and there's also a section here regarding your phase 1 letter of intent, which you do need for DOE. But down near the bottom is where you need to go for some more resources. And then the phase 2 is just above it. Here is, within this preparing the DOE grant application. So remember this bullet, this is where you'll need to be for some of your tools. So this is kind of the structure. Here's your commercialization plan example. Here's your application checklist. Here's all of those Excel workbooks with a demonstration to show you how to do it. A level of effort worksheet that's new for this year. So again, make sure you're kind of going into these applicant resources to help you out, so you're not flying blind. And then NSF has a fast lane guide. So this is not as user-friendly. It's sort of a PDF, but it will help you out on how to use Fastlane. We'll talk about commercialization for the next little bit. We've talked about the bulk of the proposal. So you've got all these certifications, you have the tech volume, you have pricing. All of these things are important, and they all are something that's going to be reviewed, seen if it's legitimate, and potentially evaluated. But commercialization is also a big part of this too. And again, it might be embedded in the tech volume, or it might be written up separately. But the commercialization requirements are diverse. Again, reminder, you're going from phase 1 to phase 3. You want to transition the technology. So review the commercialization requirements in the solicitation so that you have an appropriate amount of response. Like it might be 2 pages, it might be 4 pages, it might be a paragraph. Again, each agency is different. And really think about, what am I going to do with this technology? Who's going to buy it? What's that market? And the best way to talk about this is because I think every agency does have a different way of telling you what they think commercialization is. But I like showing all of the explanations so that you get a really, really well-rounded idea of what they want to see. So I won't read every word, but let's take a look at the bold statements here. So we want to know about the importance of the problem. This is HHS. And how this potentially can lead to a marketable product, process, or service. Okay, so we're going to tell, that's what commercialization narrative will be for HHS. Why is it important? How is it going to lead to something marketable? NSF is a little bit more detailed. They want 2 to 4 pages, and they want to see a discussion regarding each and every single of these bullets. So what's the broader societal need? What's the market or the addressable market? What are the business economics and the market drivers for this? What's the industry, and what's driving the industry need? Has the opportunity been validated in the market already? You may not have had a chance, and it kind of seems counterintuitive because you haven't put it in the market yet, but how have you done some sort of validation? What's your business case for this? If you were going to any other investor, what would you be saying to them to ask for their money, to say, hey, this is what sales are going to end up being. And then what your customers and basic business model, are. Like, you're hoping customers will be XYZ. This is how your revenue stream will be made up. This is how you hope to make money. So NSF does a really good job, I think, of kind of explaining what all the agencies ultimately want to see. The one difference for NSF, I will point this out, is that they're the only ones who ask for a broader societal need to be addressed. The other agencies don't typically look at that, but that doesn't mean if you don't have an obvious broader societal need, societal needs generally lead to sales. So, don't omit that. It's just NSF really specifically wants to see that. Now for NASA, similarly, they want a potential for targeted applications. So the difference here is they want to see, what's relative to NASA, NASA missions and projects. So this is going to take some research and due diligence on your part to see how your technology will be infused, but also not just outside of NASA, but how, you have a market in potential government agencies and commercial as well. So any other potential customers, specifically in these markets, and then your initial commercialization strategy. So, what do you need to develop and demonstrate and get this thing essentially transitioned out into the market? What is your strategy for doing that? Typically, when we talk about commercialization strategy, we like to see a timeline on how things are going to be transitioned. So you start with phase 1, you're going to get some phase 2 money. Maybe you've got other projects that could infuse at the end of phase 2, outside investment. We're going to build a new building. We're going to get new manufacturing potential, whatever the case may be. But here's how this funnel goes from a seed of phase 1 out to a larger phase 3. What is your transition? We're going to hire a business development person. We're going to, hire Salesforce people. Whatever the case may be, what is your strategy? So DOE, as you saw before, there is a example on that website of their commercialization plan. The SBDC has excellent tech source specialists who can help you write a convincing commercialization plan and can help you do some of this market research. And we'll talk on next week in part 3 regarding the technical and business assistance that you can also get from some agencies that can help you write all of this stuff up for your phase 2 proposal or your phase 2 reporting. That is helpful, but use the SBDC to help you out in this commercialization, because it's becoming more and more important. You are graded on your technical, but your technical is not going to make any difference if the agency doesn't think you can commercialize it. So for the DoD, they want to, again, know your strategy, market need, size of the market. They specifically want to see a schedule regarding, and it needs to be quantitative. So again, when do you expect to see more infusion of investment into the company? Where is that coming from? What do you need to get to the next level to take this out to market? It needs to be legitimate. There is a really good tutorial about commercialization on the SBIR.gov website. So it's tutorial number 6. So you can definitely go out. There's a lot of great tutorials on SBIR.gov for sure. So, but for commercialization, I'd recommend this one, or of course, contact the SBDC. Just a couple final things. So phase 1, your need to know this is typically firm fixed price. So you're going to get paid the amount of your contract, regardless of how much money it actually costs you to do the project. You will not be audited on it. You may be asked questions prior to award to justify your price, but there will not be an audit. So you might be provided or requested to provide cost backup. So this would be during negotiations after you've been selected. Then the contracting officer will ask you to provide some cost backup. Always ensure those objectives from the topic are met. If you're not off the bat addressing those objectives, you probably don't have a great chance of winning. always have a plan for phase 2 and beyond before you start to write this phase 1. So, where is this all going to end up is ultimately what you need to think about. And how is the work that you're proposing to do now going to be related to what you need to get done in the future? Watch out for any export or data rights issues and address those off the bat. We'll talk about that next week specifically and in depth. So these are kind of, the rabbit holes we'll get into, but they're very, very important, especially in the startup community and any companies that might have outside investment or international employees. Any proprietary information that's been self-funded, we want to make sure we protect all that. So we'll talk about that next week. Always ask questions during pre-solicitation as much as you can. And always know a simple mistake will kick it out. So if you have one extra page, it could get kicked out. It definitely won't be read, that last page. You're missing sections, you forgot something, you didn't read a certification correctly, that will all kick you out. And ultimately, give yourself enough time. It just seems like you have a lot of time, but I don't think I've ever been able to see a proposal go in, a week early. It happens, but try to go for a week early. And then finally, just some really quick phase 2s, just as a heads up. Those are typically cost type, so pricing does need to be backed up. And again, we can talk about pricing all day in a different webinar, but this is a different world when you get into phase 2, especially for DoD. I could trigger your first audit for most of the components for DoD. Commercialization absolutely needs to be quantifiable. And if you can get letters of support and they're allowed, I would definitely recommend to grab those in phase 1 too, for sure. And you might need to go back to phase 1 in order to review the phase 2 requirements. So don't get too confused on how that works. Every agency is different on how they ask you for phase 2. And that's it. Sorry, I kind of rushed through that phase 2 bit, but I wanted to make sure we had enough time for questions. There's a lot to absorb, I know.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I know there's a lot to absorb with this stuff, so it's really helpful, I think, for people to get this information. So if anyone does have questions, please go ahead and put that into the chat bar below. I'm just going to switch the slide back to our website real quick. So I did just want to say too that, like Stephanie mentioned, we do have experts with the TechSource program that can help you through different aspects of this, whether it's the commercialization plan, helping with the indirect rates. I know a lot of that stuff can be difficult to do, so we're happy to help you along that process. We want to give you the most likelihood of success with writing these proposals and hopefully winning them. So that's what we're funded to do, and that's what we want to do. So kind of how that works. I am your first point of contact for the consulting that we offer in any of the workshops, and if you have questions, so please do reach out. Go to our website, sbdc-techsource.org, and that will have all of the information that you want there. We also did 2 previous webinars that you might want to check out. One was on writing a commercialization plan, the other on calculating indirect rates. So when we send out the information about this webinar, you can also check out those as well to get that information. Let's see what we have for questions. Let's see here. I did want to ask about the project managers, the technical point of contacts, and how important it is, to reach out to them ahead of time, and what the best way is to approach them, and how responsive they tend to be.
That's a good question. It's not necessary. I've seen plenty of proposals funded that had never reached out to a TPOC or a PM. You can only reach out to them when the solicitation is not open for accepting proposals. So you kind of have to look at the timeline. Certain agencies may be really difficult to figure out who's managing that topic. NSF is very easy to go talk to someone. The PM for the area of interest is has an email, and you can email them, and they're typically very open to speaking with you. If you can find the name and number, I highly recommend, trying to schedule a phone call or even sending an email, and just not pushing your technology on them, but more asking about what they're looking for as unique and innovative, and letting them know what you're doing and seeing if there's a match there. But ultimately, you might, over the course of time, see a PM or TPOC's name show up over and over. And the more, with any business relationship, the more that you have a relationship with someone, the more likely they are going to give you a second thought versus someone they don't know. So it's just like anything else. But yeah, it's kind of hit or miss on who you're able to speak to, but just try to reach out the best that you can, but it's not necessary.
Great, thank you. So then we do have a question about moving funds around if you have received an SBIR. So would they be able to move overhead costs like office space if it turns out to be not as expensive as they proposed, and then shift it into buying hardware? These are just examples. So then they're just wondering how hard it is to report that, and if it's something they just have to report internally, or what needs to be done with that situation.
Yeah, so that's agency dependent. DOE, it'll be in your contract. It'll give you instructions on what, there's like a threshold, like a percentage of cost, and if that move exceeds that percentage of cost, then you need to let them know, compared to your budget. But under like a DoD or NASA firm fixed price, it doesn't matter. You can just do whatever you need to do with that money. You don't have to report it to anybody. Your budget's not necessarily referenced or incorporated into your contract. So you just need to read the clauses in the contract. But in general, and I think NIH might have a movement clause, I can't remember exactly, but yeah, just read the contract, but it's not the same across the board. But you do have a decent amount of flexibility, if not 100% flexibility.
Great. So then this is also a question kind of related to that. As a startup, it can be really hard to put together the indirect costs. So do you recommend applying 10% to the minimum? I guess your recommendations for people that really don't have much of an idea.
Yeah, that's a good point. It happens all the time. So there are some agencies that if you don't have an approved rate already, they will apply a de minimis to you unless you're willing to try to negotiate a rate with them. We won't get into that business. So there might be a de minimis stated into the solicitation. But what I like to suggest is try to forecast, your best case scenario or your most likely scenario for the out year. So again, it's going to take a few months for this to get reviewed, and it's a 6-month-long project or longer. So like, what's your actual start date? So from that point on, do like a forecasted budget to build an indirect rate off of, with maybe some like, oh, I hope we have office space, or I hope we can hire 5 more people, or hope we can give health benefits. And if that's the case, then that needs to be legitimate. It's because you don't want to just put, if there's not a de minimis in the solicitation, then you need to have something that looks reasonable and looks like it was actually calculated.
Great, thank you. So this person is asking, how long is the time frame from initial proposal to funding?
So typically, it depends on the agency, but typically we see at least 3 to 4 months. It could be quicker, it could be longer. It depends, if there's a government shutdown or COVID. This whole entire year has been kind of a mess. It's really messed up all the intentions, but that's usually what we see is they take a time to evaluate, and then they take time to get all the notifications out and then all the non-selects out, and then your contract will start. So for example, NASA proposals went in 3 months ago, and none of them have been, well, there might have been 1 or 2 awarded yet, but so it's been about 3 months for NASA, and we haven't seen awards yet.
Great. So we're right about up on time, and there are a couple of questions we didn't get to, but we will follow up on those afterwards. So continue asking questions. We'll probably answer as many as we can in part 3. Like I said before, if you haven't already signed up for the 3rd part, please go ahead and do that. It is a separate registration. Thank you again for attending today. You can go to our website again, sbdc-techsource.org, get in touch and see if we can help you with consulting and other resources. And I'm happy to talk with you about that. So we'll see you next week. And thanks again, Stephanie.
Thank you. We'll see you next week.